The thunder didn't break the sky that night, it softened it, like a slow hand smoothing a wrinkled sheet, quieting the city until even the streetlights seemed to hold their breath. Amara stood by the window, barefoot on cold tile, her reflection blurred by rain trembling down the glass, and for a second she didn't recognize herself at all. Not the shape of her mouth, not the slow rise of her chest, not the eyes that no longer knew where to look when honesty came knocking. It felt like stepping into a room where someone had already lived a whole life without her, left the bed warm, the books open, the mirror still fogged. Eli slept on his side of the bed, as he always did, one hand near the pillow, one foot kicked free from the sheet, his breath softly counting the seconds between her thoughts. He had a way of sleeping that made the whole room obey him. The lamp didn't flicker, the shadows didn't move without permission. Even when they argued, he slept like that. Earnest, final. As if putting the body into rest could solve something the heart refused to admit. They used to be fire. They used to be the ache that follows laughter, the bruised ribs after too much joy. There had been summers when their bodies were indistinguishable from their names, from the taste of sweet beer and apricots, from the sting of sand and the shock of rain, when lightning made the harbor look like a procession of ghosts. She had memorized him in the dark like a language that arrived without grammar. And he had worshipped her with a softness she couldn't speak of without her throat burning. And then something shifted, not like a door slamming or a final word hanging heavy in the air, but like gravity leaning toward a new planet. The bedtime stories of their bodies turned thin. The promises rang hollow. Or maybe it wasn't any of that. Maybe it was just the way she started waking before dawn with her heart beating too hard in a too quiet room, feeling like a stranger borrowed her skin and refused to give it back. It started small, Amara washing dishes and staring at the same bubble as if it would reveal a secret. Amara asking Eli about his day and not hearing a single word. Amara letting the kettle scream a second too long because the sound scalded something inside her she didn't know how to name. Desire became a hallway with too many doors. She walked and every handle burned. The first time she saw Kai, it was in the gallery's side room, one of those narrow spaces made for small paintings and large confessions. He stood too close to the canvas, as people who know the painter often do, close enough to read brushstrokes like letters. He didn't notice her at first. She noticed him the way one notices a sudden silence, the stillness around him that made the room rearrange its intentions. He turned as if he'd heard her arrive in his body, not with his ears. His eyes landed on her like a question he'd already decided to answer. He smiled, no, not even that, his mouth lifted like a secret had just been forgiven. "You're looking for the wrong thing," he said, gesturing to the painting. "Everyone looks for the image. The image is the alibi, the color is the confession." She should have laughed, should have called it pretentious. Should have mentioned that her partner adored landscapes, that they'd come for a seascape they'd seen in a magazine clipping on the fridge, that they were saving to buy a small print. Instead, Amara stepped closer to the painting and realized the blue wasn't a seascape blue at all. It was bruise blue. It was the blue of a morning that confesses it never wanted to be day. "What color is this?" she asked. "Whatever you can't name," he said, and she felt something pull like a tide inside her, a wordless gravity that had been circling for months waiting for a shore. They didn't speak again until weeks later, at a borrowed rooftop where everyone pretended they weren't afraid of the wind. She found him standing apart, watching the streetlights hook themselves to rain. "You're the color person," she said, and he laughed, surprised that she remembered. "I'm the person who can't stop staring," he said. "I've been trying to stop for years." Eli arrived late, his tie loosened, his smile warmed by the bartender's easy love for regulars. He brushed a kiss across Amara's temple and asked if she'd eaten, if she wanted to leave early, if the wind made her cold. She felt gratitude, pure and unadorned, for his kindness, for the way he had always been a door held open. And then she felt it again, the ache, the pull, the sense that some other door she had never walked through was calling her by a name she'd never told anyone. That night the rain came down heavy enough to cancel taxis, heavy enough to make strangers share umbrellas. Kai lent her his jacket. It smelled like turpentine and black pepper. Something about it felt like a dare she had already taken. She didn't tell Eli. She told herself it didn't matter. He wouldn't want to worry. She told herself small lies with the precision of a surgeon setting a bone that would heal wrong. Back in their apartment, while Eli slept, Amara stood by the window and discovered the truth had a shape. It wasn't a tidy sentence. It wasn't a single decision. It was a brightness under her skin, impatient as a second heartbeat, that whispered, "It's not that the body refuses. It's that the body refuses to be bribed." She pressed her palm to the glass, felt the night find her temperature, and listened to the room fill with the kind of quiet that means the old life is stepping back. The thought arrived without her consent, like a friend who knows the spare key's hiding place. It sat down in the center of her chest, crossed its legs, and waited for her to notice. I don't want the easy ending anymore. I don't want the clean release, the practiced proof. I want something that doesn't ask to be forgiven afterward. I want something I can't name. When she finally lay down, Eli moved in his sleep and reached for her hand, as he always did. She let him find it, and then, heart breaking in a way that felt like wind through a broken window, she whispered to the dark the only prayer she trusted. Please don't let me forget who I was before I told the truth. Mornings used to make promises to Amara. Now they made deadlines. The kettle hissed its judgment. The mirror offered its honest cruelty. Her body lived in a narrow corridor between appetite and apology, never arriving at either door. Eli tried. He brought her coffee with the cinnamon she liked and said her name gently enough to untangle knots she didn't know she held. He folded the laundry in precise halves and left slips of paper with jokes in her coat pockets, as if humor could be a rope thrown from shore to someone who had already surrendered to the tide. She could see him drown 100 times a day in the small ways he kept trying to save them. Every effort was a hand above water, every kindness a gasp. She loved him for it. She hated herself for making his kindness useless. Kai texted real names for colors like he'd been in secret negotiations with the sky. Verdigris, periwinkle, Payne's gray, as if words could taste better than mouths. He sent pictures of paint-stained fingers and a dog-eared page from a poetry book, the corner worn soft as a confession. He never asked for more than she offered. He never demanded she become a thief to feed his hunger. It made wanting him harder, it made the wanting honest. One afternoon he sent a voice note. She played it 3 times before she answered. In it, his breath caught quietly on a laugh. Come see something, he said. I can't explain it without your eyes. She felt the invitation land in her chest, simple as a key in a lock that had been waiting so long the door forgot it could open. His studio was a sanctuary carved into an alley that smelled like rain and bad decisions. The floor was a map of every color he'd ever believed in, footprints proof of pilgrimages to the canvas. A painting sat on the easel, unfinished. It was a room without people. It was a bed without bodies. The sheets were a soft, complicated white that turned at the corners like a mouth resisting a kiss. A window glowed with a light that wasn't the room's light. What is it? She asked. What you don't say, he said, and she knew, with the kind of knowing that arrives from the marrow, that she would never forget that painting. Not because it was good or because it was hers, but because it was all the words she was using up, all the silence she had yet to spend. He reached toward her face, not touching, only tracing the air an inch away, the way one checks if a flame still burns. You're here, he said, not as a question but as a mercy. She didn't kiss him, she didn't need to. The room bent around the absence. The body knows the hunger that counts. The body knows the hand it will forgive before it is offered. That night, Eli made pasta with too much garlic and laughed when she said it would make them unkissable. They ate on the floor like they used to when the couch was a dream they couldn't afford, and for a few minutes the old world returned like a stray cat that pretended it had never left. He put his hand on her knee, a familiar weight and anchor. She waited to feel the spark, the flood, the clap of thunder that meant desire had arrived to do its sacred work. But instead, she felt a fondness so painful it almost killed her. Are we okay? He asked, quiet as the end of a song. He waited with his whole body, eyes steady, shoulders braced. He was a man who wanted yesies the way the faithful want miracles. We're something, she said. It was the best she could do. She could hear the sentence collapsing under its own weight, the scaffolding groaning where the truth should have been. She watched him swallow the answer like medicine that promised nothing but the satisfaction of obedience. In bed, when he reached for her, she let him. She tried to let the body remember its rehearsals, the arch, the breath, the tremor, the old choreography. But the mind is a slow country and the heart is stubborn as a tide. The pleasure rose and fell like a tourist mistaking a lull for the end of the sea. She waited for the wave that once carried her out of herself and back again, with proof inked across her bones. Instead, an aftertaste of absence lingered. The release arrived like a polite guest leaving early. She stared at the ceiling after, counting paint chips in the corner like survival beads. It wasn't that she didn't want. It was that she wanted to want. There's a kind of cruelty in that. A gentleness turned to weaponry. A prayer answered with a question. She turned away and cried quietly, and Eli pretended not to hear, because sometimes love is the choice to be deaf where another would demand a translation that would ruin the night. Days passed and the city kept its appointments. Autumn arranged itself carefully on the trees. Windows faked warmth with sweaters hung casually on chairs. Amara started walking home different ways, letting the streets decide, as if a new route could teach the heart to take a new shape. Once, turning a corner, she saw a boy teaching his little sister to ride a bike, his hand hovering near the seat, never touching, letting faith do its clumsy, ordinary miracle. She stopped and watched until he let go and she didn't fall. She kept watching long after they were gone. When she finally spoke to Eli about the hollow she couldn't name, the room rearranged itself around the wordless thing between them. I don't know how to keep pretending, she said, voice raw as a scraped knee. It's not that I don't care, I do, maybe too much. It's just that what we have feels like a photograph I can't climb into anymore. He inhaled like a man surfacing too fast. Is there someone else? The question landed on the table like a final bill, itemized and cruel. She shook her head and told the truth backwards. Not in the way you think. The silence that followed was a verdict neither of them could read out loud. That night she lay awake and listened to the rain rehearse its part on the roof. And then, like lightning assembling itself in a single breath, the thought arrived again, this time with edges sharp enough to cut. I don't want to be saved by the same ending anymore. I don't want the release that erases the question. I want the question to open and open and open until it's big enough to climb into and call a home. The first snow fell like a rumor no one believed, soft, insistent, dissolving on contact. The market vendors wore fingerless gloves and swore at the wind like it had broken a promise. Amara started keeping a small notebook in her coat pocket, a habit she had when she was younger and didn't know the cost of knowing oneself. She wrote little truths inside it, letting them look safe in their tiny cage of paper. I lied about being tired. I lied about the headache. I lied when I said I didn't want to dance. I lied about the painting. I lied. Kai's messages slowed, then sharpened, the way hunger does when it stops pretending to be polite. He sent a single sentence over 3 days. A thing doesn't stop existing because you refuse to name it. She put the phone face down and stared at the ceiling like it owed her an answer. Eli suggested they take a trip, somewhere coastal, somewhere they could remember that water knows how to begin again every hour. She agreed because saying no felt like closing a door she had already closed in 1,000 small ways. They booked a room with a window that promised a view of a lighthouse that had made a career of surviving. The sea is a liar and a truth teller both. It says, look how endless I am. It says, watch me vanish and return in equal measure. The first morning, Amara stood ankle deep in water cold enough to steal language, and for a moment the static in her chest went quiet. Eli took pictures of her laughing, raw and startled, and she thought, maybe this is the rescue. Maybe love is this, standing in a field of blue and letting the whole world look like a beginning. They bought fish wrapped in paper and ate with their hands, grease shining on their fingers like evidence of faith. That night, Eli's mouth found her shoulder with an ache that felt like a confession. She breathed into it, tried to move toward the old fever. The body tried to remember. The heart fumbled the steps. When the wave rose, it was gentle, decentering. She held it, willing it to become the proof it had once been. It dissolved politely, like a promise made out of manners. She smiled anyway, a soldier at a parade she no longer believed in. In the morning, she woke to the sound of gulls rehearsing disaster. Eli slept with his mouth open, boyish again, unburdened by the labor of loving a woman turning into weather. She kissed his forehead and went outside to meet her loneliness like an appointment. The lighthouse stood up there, stubborn and sure, and for a second she resented it for knowing its job. She climbed the steps until her breath came sharp and hot, and at the top she found a woman in a red coat, hands bare in the cold, face turned toward a horizon that pretended it wasn't always leaving. Do you ever feel like you're being watched by your own life? The woman asked without turning. It should have been absurd. It felt like the truest question she'd been asked in months. Yes, Amara said, and the woman smiled at the sea like it had finally told the joke right. Then do the boldest thing you can live with, she said, or you'll end up living with the opposite. And then she left, her red coat slicing the white stairs like a wound the world healed around. Back in the room, Amara wrote the sentence down and stared at it until it ached. She looked at Eli packing their things, competent and kind, and knew that some choices don't offer mercies, only mirrors. On the drive home, he played the playlist they made the year they moved in together, humming under his breath, tapping the steering wheel at the same exact places as always. She watched the road and quietly made herself a promise she didn't know how to keep. I will stop pretending, even if stopping is the cruel thing. That night she went to Kai's studio. She didn't tell Eli. She didn't tell herself a better story than the one already burning her tongue. When he opened the door, the smell of paint and rain and something like cumin wrapped around her, familiar as a hand she'd been waiting for. He stepped back, giving her the room first, and the tiniest grace of that gesture almost undid her. The painting on the easel had changed. The window now showed a darker hour, the bed looked slept in, the sheet had risen into a shape that looked like a breath caught mid-sentence. She touched the air where it curved. "You finished it," she whispered. "No," he said, "but it finished me." She turned to him and for once didn't look away when the wanting looked back. He stepped close, not touching, waiting for the consent that lives beneath language. She thought of Eli asleep in their bed. She thought of the woman in the red coat. She thought of the girl she had been, who believed that love was a single road with signs that told the truth. Then she thought of the tide, and how it never stops and never apologizes. "I can't have a secret that eats," she said. "If this is anything, it can't be a basement life." He nodded, eyes steady in the honest light. "Then let it be a door," he said. "And it only opens if you turn the handle with both hands." They didn't touch. They stood close enough to share a breath and let the room decide what the body already knew. When she left, the city smelled like snow again, merciful as a clean page. She walked home and sat beside Eli on the edge of the bed and said the first true thing she had said in months. "There is something in me that is no longer yours." Silence isn't always the coward, sometimes it's the saint. He didn't speak for a long time, he didn't touch her. He looked at the floor and then at her hands, and finally at the window as if the dark had applied for the job of referee. "Is there love?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "but it's not the kind that will save us." He closed his eyes and the city behind them exhaled a small, wintered prayer. They slept in separate rooms because they didn't know where else to put the night. The house looked unburdened by dawn, relieved, like a theater after closing, costumes slumped and honest, makeup surrendered back to its jars. Amara made coffee and cried into it and laughed at herself for flavoring grief. Eli came into the kitchen and leaned on the counter the way he did the day they unpacked their first box. "I don't want to hate you," he said. She nodded. "I don't want to hate me either." They spoke like people walking across ice, listening for cracks. He asked if she wanted to try counseling. She said she wanted to try the kind of honesty that makes counseling a mercy and not a bandage. He asked if there was a chance the thing inside her would come back. She said she didn't want to treat her heart like a boomerang trained to return to the hand that threw it. He winced and thanked her for not lying better. She went to work. She sent Kai a message that read like a psalm. "I told him. I'm not a secret." He answered with a single word that felt like a world. "Good." She breathed for the first time that day without the room narrowing. Days accumulated. People asked casual questions they didn't deserve true answers to. She learned that grief is heavier when it's equitable. Eli didn't break the plates. He didn't scream. He didn't audition for martyrdom. He said he would step out while she found a new apartment that he could stay with his brother for 2 weeks. He folded towels and labeled boxes with dignified grief. Kitchen, books, winter. He was both the heartbreak and the balm, and she didn't know which one hurt more. She found a small place above a bakery that woke at 3 a.m. and made the world smell like a chance. The first night there, she lay on the floor because the bed frame hadn't arrived and watched the light from the street fuss at the ceiling. She felt the shape of the room like a new language she would have to mispronounce for a while. It wasn't freedom, not exactly. It was a clean kind of captivity, being held by only the truth, no softer walls to lean on. Kai waited like he promised. He didn't rush the new life as if speed could protect it from cost. He came over one evening with a fern that looked like a handful of rain and a book of poems whose spine fell open to a line that read, "I am full of longing and it looks like a city that forgot my name." She laughed until she cried because sometimes relief is indistinguishable from sorrow in the first hour it arrives. They kissed finally. It wasn't fireworks or hymns. It was a door opening onto another door. It was hunger finding a table set with clean plates and a quiet promise, "We will not lie to eat." The body answered and the mind didn't interrupt. When release came, it wasn't a receipt. It was a river. It didn't ask to be proven. It made its own proof and left it in the softness behind her knees, in the quiet after, in the way she didn't feel compelled to perform relief. She cried anyway because joy and grief share a mouth. He held her like he knew the difference and loved them both. Weeks later, Amara met Eli for coffee. They sat by the window of the place with the good biscotti and bad lighting. He looked a little older in the way men do when they put down a weight they had mistaken for purpose. He asked if she was okay. She said she was raw and awake. He nodded like that answer was something he could wish for himself. "I keep wanting to ask if it was worth it," he said, then winced at his own cruelty. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. Ask the right question, he stilled. Did you do the boldest thing you could live with? She smiled, surprised and tender that he remembered the woman in the red coat without ever meeting her. Yes, she said, and I want that for you too. He exhaled like some old house in him had stopped creaking. I'll try, he said. They left it there, two good people who loved each other in a way that finally told the truth. Spring loosened winter's grip the way a hand loosens when it finally believes it doesn't need to hold the world still. The bakery windows fogged at dawn. The city rehearsed its green. Amara hung a cheap curtain that made the morning light blush. She stood by the window the way she had that first night and realized the city hadn't forgotten her name. The city had been waiting for her to say it. She bought a small canvas with money she didn't really have, and when she made the first mark, it was clumsy and brave. She painted a bed unmade and a window full of weather and a small fern that looked like a new language. She painted the outline of a woman's hand not touching a face, hovering just above, honoring the heat. She didn't name the colors. She let them be confessions without alibis. When she stepped back, the painting looked like a story told by a room that had survived several versions of its own truth. She messaged Kai a photo, and he replied with a picture of his studio floor, his footprints wandering toward a clean corner she'd never seen before. A beginning, he wrote. She didn't answer. She turned off her phone and stood in the light until she remembered that beginnings aren't gentle. They are honest. And honesty, finally, felt like a place she could sleep without waking to count the cracks. That night, alone in her apartment, the rain came soft against the window, and the city did not hush in obedience. It sang. She lay down and didn't pray to forget. She didn't beg for the old performances to return. She let herself be the person who had stepped through a door with both hands, and she did the ordinary miracle of sleeping through the night. In the morning, she woke not to a thunderous epiphany, but to the quiet triumph of wanting her own life, whole and unnegotiated. It wasn't a release, it was a river. It was a room that finally held her, not as a guest, but as the person who knew where the light switch was in the dark.